Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So there's been a lot of negativity among many conservatives regarding their outlook of the upcoming elections in November ever since Joe Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. But there have been many positives, actually, that happened this week, and I wanted to make a video covering them to give you some good news that is going on for the elections. So I wanted to make this video to cover them and give you some good news surrounding conservatives' chances of victory this year. First was Kamala Harris finally revealing her running mate on Tuesday, that being Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Tim Walz is an extreme liberal. He has an extremely far-left record as the governor of Minnesota, and Kamala Harris supposedly picked him since he's from the Midwest, a key region that contains swing states including Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. It remains to be seen how much he will actually help, because his policies are far removed from those that are popular with the majority of voters in those swing states. Looking at his record here, summarized in this list, there are so many far-left items to attack him on that Trump and Vance are salivating over, and overall, this is very positive for conservatives. Other options, such as the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, which would have been a big boost in that battleground state, they would have been much harder opponents to nail down and attack effectively, since they both have structured their image as being moderates, even though in reality they are your average liberal Democrat. But they don't have as many skeletons in their closet as Tim Walz does, like those that have come out in recent days since Harris picked him, including him lying about his military record. But they also don't have the openly extreme policies that Tim Walz unapologetically pushes. He recently passed and signed into law a bill in Minnesota that gave driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, which by proxy, unspokenly, allows them to be able to vote, potentially. He wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state for illegals. He raised taxes by billions of dollars. He let Minneapolis burn for 3 days with zero action in the riots of 2020. And he has been extremely far left on social issues. He supports abortion with no limits. He allows biological men to compete in women's sports unchecked. He supports children undergoing sex changes, which is very disturbing. And even though he calls J.D. Vance, of all people, weird, he is the one that put women's products in boys' bathrooms. If that's not strange, I don't know what is. So there's so much to attack Tim Walz on. He only makes Kamala Harris look more extreme than she already is, instead of moderating her message to voters like some other potential vice president picks would have done. So this is a huge blessing in disguise for conservatives, and many people in the Republican Party and on Trump's team are very happy about this, and this is probably their easiest candidate to run against. And speaking of J.D. Vance, he had a great optical moment this week where he completely showed up Kamala Harris, who came out in a recent rally and challenged Vance to say things about her to her face. So what did he do? Since Kamala Harris does not do any interviews or press conferences or make herself public at all to reporters to answer questions and speak to voters directly, he pulled up on the same tarmac that Kamala Harris's Air Force Two plane was parked at. He went over to it, told the press that he wanted to get a closer look at his soon-to-be new plane, and called out Kamala for avoiding the press and acting all tough at a rally, but never making herself publicly available, and turning down a debate offer from Trump since it was on Fox News after challenging him to debate anywhere, anytime. He completely owned her with this move and made her look completely weak, which she is. She might be extremely liberal, but she's also weak and incompetent. And this was a very good optical move from J.D. Vance. But outside of these events happening that are affecting the presidential race in a positive way overall for the Trump-Vance team, conservatives did very well in primary elections that happened in several states this past Tuesday. The only big result that did not go conservatives' way was the Missouri governor primary, where Mike Kehoe won the nomination over Bill Eigel by a 7-point margin, which was pretty disappointing because State Senator Eigel was very conservative and would have made a phenomenal governor, probably one of the best Republican governors in the country overnight. Whereas Mike Kehoe, the sitting lieutenant governor, is really nothing special and does not provide any upgrade over the current governor, Mike Parson, who is overall pretty squishy, pretty weak, and doesn't bring much new to the table. So that was overall a little disappointing. However, Republican turnout overall was good in this race. You can see almost 700,000 Republicans voted, whereas Democrats could not even crack 400,000 in their primary, showing that Republicans should have no problem winning any race in Missouri this coming fall. And we scroll down to other races. For lieutenant governor, a big upset win for the conservative candidate David Wassinger against the Rhino Lincoln Howe, barely squeaking out a 1-point margin of victory, winning by a little over 7,000 votes. He did very well in the St. Louis area and in the Kansas City area, and that was enough to push him over the top as the election day votes rolled in on election night. David Wassinger is a political newcomer who is very strong on the Second Amendment and illegal immigration, which is very important. Whereas Lincoln Howe, a current state senator, killed many pro-Second Amendment anti-red flag laws during his time in the state legislature, and overall, on the issues in general, resembles much more of a moderate Republican or a rhino rather than a strong conservative. So this was a big win, and also is going to be a big upgrade over Mike Kehoe, who is currently in this seat. So while conservatives don't get an upgrade for the governorship, they certainly do for the lieutenant governorship, which is important because, as we see with Mike Kehoe, the lieutenant governor ends up usually becoming governor or running for governor one day. So this gives Republicans a strong conservative waiting in the wings to be a future governor. Very, very good news. In the attorney general race, the incumbent Andrew Bailey held on by a wide landslide margin, getting 63% of the vote and carrying every single county in the state of Missouri, winning by 26 points against his opponent, Will Scharf. Trump gave a co-endorsement to both candidates, and while I had no problems with Will Scharf, Andrew Bailey has been a really solid attorney general. And we know his record. We don't have to guess how he would be in that post. So I think it's positive overall that he won renomination and will stay as the Attorney General of Missouri. The final primary for a statewide office was for the Secretary of State, the office that is currently held by John Ashcroft, who did not run for re-election to run for governor. He took third place. He also is nothing really that special and much more of an establishment Republican than a conservative. Denny Hoskins, who won the nomination for this seat by an impressive roughly 8-point margin, and we can see in the green carrying most of the counties in the state, he is very, very conservative, and he's a huge election integrity hawk, which will be great in this role. That's what you want, especially in a Republican state. You want to make sure you have the strongest possible election laws to make sure that elections are conducted in a manner that's very above board, very transparent, and not prone to problems, and one that voters can trust. So Republicans retained a great attorney general, and they got upgrades in the lieutenant governor and secretary of state offices, which is absolutely huge in a conservative state like Missouri. Furthermore, another victory in the state was found in the 3rd Congressional District. A retiring, run-of-the-mill House Republican is going to be replaced by Bob Onder in this safe red seat, and he is very, very conservative, and he won by 10 points in this primary against the rhino Kurt Schaefer. Trump gave Onder the endorsement, which was huge, and he completely called out Schaefer as the rhino that he is. And Bob Onder is going to make a phenomenal congressman. He is extremely conservative, and this was a huge gain for conservatives in the House, as he will probably join the House Freedom Caucus more likely than not. And it looked like Schaefer was going to win late into the night, but then all of a sudden, Bob Onder did really well in the St. Louis area, and when those counties came in, they came in strong for him, and they put him over the top, which was an absolutely great development. So a lot of wins out of Missouri, and there was another good result in Kansas, where Derek Schmidt, the former very conservative attorney general of the state, won the nomination to replace the retiring Jake LaTurner in the 2nd Congressional District in Kansas. and I have no doubt that he will make a great congressman. He constantly led the charge as Attorney General against federal overreach and especially was strong on the immigration issue, which I think most people would agree is the biggest issue facing our country right now. So electing more strong conservatives on that issue is a very positive development. Michigan also held its primaries last night. Alyssa Slotkin won the Democrat nomination there, unsurprisingly, against a more progressive challenger, and Mike Rogers won the nomination with the backing of Donald Trump on the Republican side. And he won every single county in the state. He won over 60% of the vote. So that was positive to see there was not very much a contested primary and that most Republican voters in the state are getting behind Mike Rogers because you want to be as united as possible going into the general election to hopefully flip the Senate seat, which would be a great pickup. Perhaps the biggest part of this race that was positive for Republicans is the fact that they got 875,000 votes against the Democrats' 925,000 votes, translating to the Democrats only receiving 50,000 more votes than the Republicans did in total. And Democrats regularly outpace Republicans by anywhere from 100 to 200,000 votes in primaries. So the fact that it was more neck and neck in turnout shows that Republicans have a good chance in this state, both at the presidential and Senate level in the fall, and reflecting that Republicans seem to be just as enthused, if not more, than Democrats in this state. Further down ballot, there was an important primary for the 8th Congressional District in Michigan, where Paul Young won with 75% of the vote and clinched the nomination. And this is important because this is an open Democrat seat. It's being targeted by House Republicans to be a flip and a pickup. And Paul Young has been fundraising very, very well. He's been out fundraising the Democrat opponent in this seat, and he looks to be a strong candidate going into November. That would give Republicans their best shot at winning it. And now he has even more momentum after winning the primary so handily. And the last state that had elections on Tuesday was the state of Washington on the West Coast. And this is always an interesting state because just like California, whether Republican, Democrat, or Independent, they all appear on the same primary ballot, and the top two finishers advance to a head-to-head matchup in the general election. And overall, the primary is a decent indicator and tends to correlate quite well to how the general election goes for the different parties. And there are obviously outliers where the general election margin is quite different than what the primary would suggest it would be. But overall, it should give you a decent barometer of how things stand for either candidate's chances heading into the November election. Republicans did not have a great showing in the Senate primary, which is not surprising because you're going up against an incumbent who's really not that well known. I mean, who's ever heard of Maria Cantwell before? I don't think many people have. She's not a very well-known senator. So not much baggage on her. She probably has decent name ID in the state, you would assume. So Republicans didn't do great here. Democrats overall cracked about 58% in this primary, whereas Republicans struggled to crack 40%. And you can see by the map that Cantwell carried most counties in the state. It's not a great showing, but in other races, they did quite well. For the governorship, the Democrats barely cracked 50% with all of their candidates' vote totals added up. And the lead candidate, the current Attorney General, who's supposed to be an electoral juggernaut, only got 45% of the vote. And Republicans got a vote total of around 42-43%, which is pretty good for Washington standards. Republicans also got a similar vote total in the lieutenant governor race, getting around 43% of the vote. And for the Attorney General primary, you can see they won most counties in the state. Again, it's the primary. There was only one Republican here to consolidate all of the conservative voters behind him. Yes, that's true. But still, they nominated a solid candidate that got 42% of the vote, 500,000 votes behind him, and there's still only 70% of the vote counted in the state, because of course there is. It's a Democrat state. They like to take 10 days to count the votes nowadays. And the remaining vote is election day vote, which should trend more Republican. So you could see Republicans in Washington get upwards of anywhere from 43 to 45% of the vote, which would be really, really good for their standards in a safe Democrat state like Washington. And furthermore, down ballot, they did even better. In the 3rd Congressional District, which is held by a Democrat incumbent running for re-election, the Republicans combined for almost 52% of the vote against her 46%, with Joe Kent, a very conservative candidate that faced her last time and lost by a razor-thin margin in the midterms, is getting the rematch she wanted and will once again be the candidate to take her on. And last time there was a much more divisive Republican primary, and there was not that this time. So he should have a much more unified Republican voter base behind him going into November. So this looks like a prime seat for Republicans to flip in the House, because the Democrat incumbent is not doing very well for an incumbent. She barely got 46% of the vote, and it could go down, like I said, as more votes come in. That probably will favor the Republicans. In the 4th district, the more conservative candidate, the Trump-backed candidate, Jared Sessler, cleared 30% of the vote and won every single county in the primary against the incumbent, the Rhino, Dan Newhouse, who back in the day voted to impeach Donald Trump. Tiffany Smiley also got a co-endorsement from Trump. So if voters that voted for Smiley show up for Sessler in the general election against Newhouse, a Republican versus Republican general election, then Sessler should win, because put Sessler's vote with Smiley's vote, it adds up to over 50%. And sure, again, primaries don't always correlate 100% to general elections. It's important to note that. But it still shows that there's a good shot to oust the Rhino Newhouse, and that would be very, very good. And then in the 5th district, in my opinion, the most conservative Republican won this seat, Michael Baumgartner. It's a very Republican seat, currently held by the retiring Kathy McMorris Rogers, and I think he will be a good replacement and possibly even an upgrade in this seat. There also was a good result in the 8th congressional primary for Republicans, where the Democrat incumbent barely cleared 51% of the vote, only getting 8,000 more votes than the highest Republican finisher, Carmen Goers, who almost got 45% of the vote, showing Republicans that if they get turnout up high enough in this district, they also have a potential to flip this seat in addition to the 3rd congressional district in Washington. So that's very good news for Republicans' chances of keeping the House. And finally, a kind of comedic result showing how good Republicans did in a deep blue state like Washington. They might have just automatically flipped a statewide office, obviously not a huge one, but it's the Public Lands Commissioner in Washington. 2 Republicans look to be the top 2 finishers, meaning that they would lock out all Democrats from the general election. This is currently a Democrat-held seat, but the 2 Republicans you can see here are the 2 top vote finishers with 80% of the vote counted. And the 2nd Republican has a 10,000 vote lead over the highest finishing Democrat. If that result holds, then Republicans will just have quietly picked up a statewide office in the state where Seattle, of all places, is located. And that's a very, very positive development, and kind of an embarrassing blow to Democrats. So recapping all of these key elections that happened on Tuesday, you can see how many positive results there were for Republicans' chances at victory in the fall, and also for conservative candidates getting nominated in key races, many of them being safe Republican seats or states that they're all but certain to go on and win in the general election. So while the media and most news stories want you to be dooming about Republicans' chances to win in the 2024 election, things are not all as bad as they seem, and in many cases, things are actually going quite well as of late.